Hi, my name is Bethany, and I am a late diagnosed autistic adult. Here on my channel, I usually cover autism related things with a focus on being research-based. Today, I want to talk to you about the rising conversation around faking disorders, including autism. This is a controversial topic, and I imagine some people are going to have some big emotions over it, so please use restraint when engaging with others in the comment section, please. And please bear with me before making assumptions about what I'm going to say or how I see things, etc. Now, a while ago, I made a video on autism self-diagnosis, and I had no idea that I would have to revisit this as quickly as I have. My biggest thing about that video and the concept was that I didn't think people would want to have autism, and so it didn't make sense to me why someone would go after researching something like this and end up self-diagnosing when there's such a stigma around it. That has changed. Acceptance efforts and visibility online has kind of led to this unintended side effect. While it's very nice that autism isn't seen just as a pile of negative things, there's also something strange that has occurred now. It is primarily amongst young people somewhat cool, trendy, or some kind of level of status or clout to have a disorder such as autism, DID, which is dissociative identity disorder, and or Tourette's. I think we need to acknowledge that this is true. People are faking or mimicking because it gives them a sense of identity, a reason to be considered oppressed or unique, or just in general gives them access to one of the strongest drugs on the internet, clout. That does not mean that every person who makes content online or finds out about a misdiagnosed or undiagnosed condition from something like YouTube or TikTok or whatever is faking or mimicking or just maybe a very misled person. A lot of people do find out these things authentically. And a lot of people, such as myself and many in our community, are authentic people sharing content that is very helpful. For example, with Tourette's syndrome, someone's tics can trigger tics in another person with Tourette's syndrome or a similar motor disorder. Or with autism, people might become more comfortable engaging in stims. Just because someone watches content and does similar things doesn't mean they're faking. The problem is that those who are faking, who desire that sense of identity or uniqueness or just want a little drop of clout, are really, in my opinion, side effects of this idea of acceptance and awareness above understanding. Many times people who are knowledgeable about a condition or have a condition can see very quickly the people who are mimicking or faking, because that person who is doing that doesn't even really actually understand how what they're trying to fake works. They've just seen some things online and think that they have enough of a grasp of it to copy it themselves. This isn't to say that everyone who falls under faking or mimicking is doing this out of some evil desire, or even in some cases super consciously. Part of this phenomenon might actually be explained by the concept of social contagion. Basically, when you're constantly exposed to a concept or idea, you are likely to adopt that concept or idea, especially if the person who is presenting that concept or idea is seen in a positive light by you. This could be through believing that they have no reason to lie to you or to deceive you, or that they would gain nothing, or from seeing how popular someone is. The more and more you hear and see this idea, the more likely you are to adopt it for yourself. Checklists and screeners that are meant to be helpful can unconsciously be manipulated or simply too vague and can appear to confirm to you that you should adopt this concept, mindset, idea, etc. Many people don't consciously think to adopt something. They usually do this unconsciously, such as how social contagion usually works. Social contagion seems to be better termed mass sociogenic illness, defined as the rapid spread of illness, signs, and symptoms affecting members of a cohesive group, originating from a nervous system disturbance involving excitation, loss or alteration of function, whereby physical complaints that are exhibited unconsciously have no corresponding organic etiology. In fact, when it comes specifically to the situation regarding tics, as I imagine this is the condition with the most visible effects out of the most popular conditions people appear to be mimicking, the term mass social media induced illness is suggested as a more accurate descriptor in one paper. 2 examples are given of similar types of incidences, specifically regarding tic disorders, where 2 different groups of people at different times suddenly developed tics or tic-like movements that resolved or significantly improved once school ended, and another that started suddenly in only one day and resolved itself over the subsequent months. This implies that the sociogenic illness or social contagion spreads rapidly, can be seen even in legitimate actions despite no real disorder being present, and resolves once the social factor leaves. For example, if someone stopped going online and watching content related to their suddenly developed disorder, it is likely that they would not see symptoms anymore after a few months. When talking about self-diagnosis, I saw it as mostly harmless. I figured people could see and think for themselves and decide what was genuine and what kinds of ideas or things that they should accept for themselves. I may have been a bit idealistic because people don't really have the energy to try to critically think and critically assess things and do this for literally everything they come across. Well-meaning people who only parrot the ideas that kind of come from the autistic overlords, the main ideas maybe of the neurodivergent movement and whatever else it is, when you just make mirroring content, this can be damaging. And this is whether someone's diagnosed or not. So why would it be damaging just to repeat the things that are the big ideas, the big thoughts that most of the other autistic people seem to be promoting? Because many times it's not their actual experience. They don't truly understand the magnitude and significance of a concept. They may have been exposed to a simplified version for being able to get information across quickly, so they don't really understand the nuance behind something before they just repeat it, and or they continue to oversimplify. So if someone explained something and realized they're not going to sit down for a 20-minute video, they may have tried to put it in 5 minutes, which means you're going to have to simplify some things. And the next person comes along and wants to explain that in simpler terms until it becomes oversimplified and people don't really understand the nuance behind it because they're only hearing very oversimplified information coming from everyone. It's come to the point where people genuinely think that they can identify as an autistic person. Now, I will pause here to say that some people may say this, meaning that they prefer identity first language and see themselves as autistic, not with autism, seeing autism as an integral part of who they are, thus part of their identity. So some people might say that in that way, like their identity is intertwined with autism, so they identify as autistic. But this can lead to confusing statements because when you say you identify as autistic, it sounds like someone else who doesn't quite understand what you're actually meaning can just decide that, you know, that sounds like me, and I guess I identify as autistic, and that's really not how that works. As much as autism can be considered part of one's identity, one can't just decide to identify as autistic. You either are or you aren't. Your actual neurology and how your brain is wired is either that way or it's not. It's not something we can choose to have or to not have. Beyond that matter, people's well-meaning oversimplification of autistic traits often leads to people who genuinely do think that they meet the criteria for being autistic without knowing what the full requirements are. Hiding under the covers and being an awkward middle schooler doesn't necessarily cut it as meeting the standards for autism, but a 30-second video isn't really able to capture the whole concept of what autism is or the nuance behind explaining what a trait is, etc. Some argue that those with the condition would never show anything that could be negative or stigmatizing about it, such as stimming or even meltdowns. But I disagree with that. A lot of people show very vulnerable things, myself included, to help people understand and to help people feel seen. Obviously, this isn't for everyone, and it's okay for people to be skeptical of a camera that's conveniently placed for catching certain phenomena. Additionally, blindly parroting what the neurodivergent cool kids have to say can also lead to adding fuel to fires that I think need to be put out. Hating autism parents and attacking people for using the wrong words or terms seems to be something our community has no qualms with spreading about and encouraging, while having zero empathy for each other. Above all is the infantilizing and ableist, yes, ableist, approach of many of those who do fake autism. They intentionally talk like babies, pretend to not understand simple words or concepts, and overact their sensitivities. Some of them double down and play clueless baby victim when they're called out. These are the ones that make me genuinely angry, because it reveals how they actually perceive autistic people as little babies who look cute on camera. We are human beings. Sure, some of us like childish things. We might like stuffies. We might have interests that seem really childish and might even seem like our reactions are almost kid-like or childlike to certain things when we're super excited. But we are not cute little babies for other people to pity or to play into some other interests. If you want to act like a baby with your significant other, that's your business, but don't post it online and say it's because you're autistic so you can get attention. Fakers, mimickers, and simply misunderstanders are unfortunately casting a lot of doubt and a sense of illegitimacy on the autistic community online. Fake claiming has been a thing since pretty much forever, but now they are being justified for going after people for not seeming autistic enough. The answer is not to shut down advocates and people who are visible about their conditions, disabilities, and neurodivergence. It's frustrating that the positive impact that many creators have had is being pushed back due to clout chasers. It's making it harder for people to be more themselves and open online or even in person, or disclosing their disability for fear of being like people who are faking and clout chasing online. While I am conflicted about empowering people to fake claim, I do think it's important that we acknowledge that some people are faking. The platform currently most notorious right now for overfeeding the same type of content like mental health and disability content to people is TikTok. And this can become appealing for someone who is looking for a sense of identity or uniqueness, etc. Again, that whole social contagion idea, when it's everywhere, everything they see, everyone they look up to is like this, it kind of starts to feed into that person, and consciously or unconsciously they may mimic these types of things. One man revealed he lied about having autism, although he didn't build his content around having autism. He just kind of let people believe, and I guess kind of acted like what he believed autism might look like. And he said he planned to reveal that he wasn't autistic whenever he hit a certain amount of followers. People jump on trends to gain a following, and to our misfortune, neurodivergence has become a trend, despite being a legitimate thing at its core. I do think, however, it is important to extend empathy. Some people may have legitimate symptoms of a condition they don't have thanks to social contagion. Others are seeking an identity and otherwise feel lost. We rarely win anything when we take sides and demonize each other. The only ones I don't feel bad for or really have any desire to extend empathy for is those who fake on purpose for the purpose of getting money from people, because clearly they came into it with bad intentions and just want to scam people. When it comes to self-diagnosis, I'm currently of the opinion that if you are capable of going after an official diagnosis, please do so. I know that many people do face barriers. I faced barriers myself when it came to even finding someone who would diagnose, but even just as these years go by, it's not been very long, but I do feel that a lot of our society is more open to autism and neurodivergence, and it doesn't feel as stigmatized as it did even just a few years ago. And while there is still stigma and there are still people with old patterns of thought, I do think it's going to be a lot easier for a lot of people to find practitioners who are capable of assessing for autism and people who are older than children age. It might take a lot more effort on your end than you anticipated. You might have to make those awful phone calls, which I hate, or get someone you trust to do those. Since the internet was surprisingly unhelpful regarding search engine results for me personally. I understand that not everyone has money. I understand that not everyone has insurance, etc. But there are a good portion of you who probably have options you didn't know that you had. I understand that for many, it's simply not worth it, and that's okay. Here's my only hesitation with that. Making online content or in some way marketing yourself as an autistic person who is able to give a genuine autistic perspective when you are self-diagnosed and you haven't tried to go after any sort of medical diagnosis. If you are self-diagnosed and you do want to make that content, just please disclose it. I think that that's important for people to make the decision themselves, to know that you are very confident that you're autistic, and they might see it too. They're like, oh yeah, you're totally autistic. And there are other people who might say, well, yes, but you're self-diagnosed, and maybe I won't weigh this as much as I weigh diagnosed people's information and life experiences. I think that should be up to the viewer or up to the person who consumes the content. I don't think it's fair to ask people to weigh the perspective of a self-diagnosed person the same as a diagnosed person, especially if that self-diagnosed person has never wanted or tried to go after an official diagnosis. The reason I say that is because if you're not desiring to find out, that's really strange. The reason I say that's really strange is because every autistic person that I've come across who's gone through this whole journey has wanted to know. And it's strange to me that people will just kind of take everyone at their word, even people who don't want to know for sure. That's really strange. It's just strange to me, but that's my own personal bias. You might not feel that way at all. Either way, I think when it comes to self-diagnosis, that people should be cautious in making content, and they should just disclose. And some people are going to take you at your word just fine, and they're totally fine with self-diagnosis, and other people might not take your word as highly when it comes to your personal experiences being autistic experiences. And I think that's just something we have to deal with in life. I know that the system is flawed, I get that, but with what's going on, I think that it would just help people. Because you could be completely right. You could absolutely be autistic and be self-diagnosed. A lot of people are. But if you're wrong, and you have things that overlap, so it looks a little bit like it could be autism, but a professional can tell that it's actually not autism. It might be something else. It might be ADHD. It might be OCD. Whatever it is. If you're wrong, you could be adding to a mess of confusion. I had to be self-diagnosed during my information journey, but I didn't post online as an authority because I didn't know. I did not feel comfortable doing that. Some people do. I just think we should disclose. To add to that, you don't have to be autistic. You don't have to be a diagnosed or undiagnosed, self-diagnosed, whatever autistic person to share factual data, research, information. Even if I was not autistic, the great majority of my videos would still be completely useful to everyone. They would still have the same amount of value because they're all based on research. Yes, sometimes I add in my personal perspective from some things, which is kind of how I try to make things more my own, and so you can know me a little bit more as a person, and maybe you can relate better to research and information. But a great majority of it is quite frankly, I researched something and I shared it to you and I presented it to you. Honestly, I think that it would be great if our community would consider this more for themselves, just like looking a little bit into research and data before they say things, because we have this kind of idea going around that as long as you're autistic, you're an expert on autism, but that's not really true. When I was 23, I got diagnosed, and before the age of 23, I was still autistic. I just didn't know I was. That didn't make me an expert on autism. I had to go through so much learning and so much understanding and realize like what I understood autism to be and what autism really was were totally different things. I was not an expert on autism. I was an expert on my experience, and I can now identify experiences and put names to things that I didn't know had names. but I was not inherently an expert on autism just because I was autistic. And I think that's just something we've got to stop saying in our community, that just because you're an autistic person, you're somehow an expert. That's just not the case. And it kind of empowers people to say a lot of things that are questionable and feel entitled to be treated as if they are the final say on things when they might not know exactly what they're talking about. And I know a lot of people don't like going into research because it contains words people don't like. It might have some ableist language, might be genuinely ableist, might be questionably, depending on how much you care about how words are said. But the facts are still the facts, whether or not the researchers interpret it a certain way. So if you look into the actual information, you can see whether they're kind of interpreting it the way they want to, or whether it actually, what they actually did actually says that. So research is still valuable, even if it has language you don't like. It's really frustrating because we've made this kind of false dichotomy, right? Of these autism professionals who don't know anything and they only care about like ableism and this false research. And then we have the autistic people and you can only listen to autistic people, but they don't tend to like the research because the research has like the words they don't like. And we're just making this divide that doesn't need to be there. I think really if you mixed these two groups, we would get the most information and value, but we have this really bad tendency to not want to do that. This ends up leading to this concept of correct narratives instead of actually spreading information and understanding around autism. And look, diagnosed or not, an autistic person is still an autistic person. I'm not trying to invalidate that. However, being in a society that currently sees autism and other things like it, neurodivergence, other conditions and disabilities as trendy, it is important to identify and disclose when you are self-diagnosed. And again, people can decide for themselves how much weight they put on your personal experience, whether you're diagnosed or not. And sure, some people might be misdiagnosed as autistic when they're not. That's possible, but it's a lot less likely than someone who is self-diagnosed and who hasn't consulted with professionals in the field. Many people may feel that this is unfair or unkind to self-diagnosed people, and that's not my intention at all. I think that this has become a necessity purely because there are people who are faking autism, who are perpetuating infantilization and stigmatization of autism and a crap ton of misunderstanding. So what are your thoughts on this current trend of people faking disorders? Do you think that people who are being accused of faking are fakers, or do you think they're genuine? Do you think people should disclose when they're self-diagnosed, or do you think that's unfair? I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. Just please be respectful to each other in the comment section. If you are interested in autism-related topics from me, you can go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I attempt to upload every Thursday at 4 p.m. at Central Standard Time. A lot of times that hasn't been happening due to personal reasons. My dog is currently with me right now, so we're getting pets. Thank you to everyone who supports me here on YouTube as YouTube channel members, through Ko-fi, and as patrons on Patreon. And a special thank you to my Spinny Stimmy tier patron, Jack Varney. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!